It's day 95 of a screenwriter's journey. I don't know how I'm going to handle this day because actually, day 95 is extremely short. I finally, after all this time, I changed it 3 to 4, and then I realized 14 years later she's turning 18, so she's almost 4 when we first meet her. So that was a one of those things that you just sort of gloss over because you've read it so many times. And so I thought, well, I better change that. And again, one less thing for the reader to think about, because what does 3 to 4 mean? I mean, when you're that young, I think it's important to specify an age. Okay. I don't even know what I just did there, but I'm going through this obviously pretty fast. Oh, I know what I'm doing. I'm fixing some typos that one of my sons found. That one right here isn't exactly a typo. It was just confusing. So I made it clear that there's benches and there's on opposite sides, hopefully. So that's pretty much all I did on this day. But guess what? I'm going to roll it into tomorrow, which is in fact still today as far as we're concerned. Okay, what we're doing today is a little bit different. I'm not sure what day this is. Probably day 95 or 96, 94, somewhere in there. And the reason I don't know is because I'm doing this live, not live on YouTube, but live while I'm reading the script. So before, as you know, I write and then I go back and record the commentary later. But today, since I'm really not going to be doing much writing, I'm basically just going to be commenting / explaining. I guess if a script needs explanation, that's probably not a good thing. I'm just adjusting the volume a little here. That should be good. So I'm just going to go through it. I'm not going to go through the whole script because as I've found from reading other people's scripts and commenting on them, and then I tried this once before, and for reasons that I won't go into, I didn't use it. But it's probably going to take me a while. And I mean, it could literally take 5 or 6 hours to go through the whole script if I give it a complete analysis or self-analysis. So we'll just get started and see how it goes. And the reason I'm doing this is I'm about ready to, as you saw, I think yesterday, unless I included in today's edition, after getting some feedback on the changed names from Larry and Gary to Troy and Tony, another one of my sons read it and was not super confused, but confused enough that he said it was kind of annoying to try to keep track of them. Not only because they both started with T, but they ended with Y and they both had an O in the name. So I broke down and looked up on the internet popular twins names, and I found 3 or 4 sets that I really liked. And as you probably saw, I settled, at least for now, on Jake and Luke, which I kind of like because obviously they end in KE, but they're different enough that no one's going to confuse them, and they are only 4 letters. And also, if I wanted to go with Lucas and Jacob, I could, and I'm still thinking about that. Anyways, it doesn't really matter. It would be interesting to know how many times on any given script the names change, even after it goes into production and the director goes, you know what, he doesn't really look like a Harry. Let's make him Walter or something. All right, so what I'm going to do is just kind of analyze the script and explain why I wrote what I wrote as I go. So let's get into it. Fade in. Something as simple as that. I don't know, I may have mentioned, but there was a discussion on one of the forums or pages, I think it was in Facebook Screenwriters page, about people not using fade in and fade out anymore. And I may have commented before that I literally can't imagine myself not writing fade in and fade out because it's, I mean, for psychological reasons only. When you think of it, I don't know how many films actually start with a fade in. They may just be a cut. But anyways, all right. Utility Van Night. Holly Hart. I think I may have mentioned, I looked up some like strong female names or strong, maybe it was female names, and Holly was on there, or was that just the last name Hart? Can't remember. Early 20s, sits on a padded bench, seat across from the Burley, late 30s. Wonder if there should be a comma after Burley. After the Burley, late 30s, Paul and both were dark. So maybe paramilitary is obviously editorializing. That's why I wrote that, is to say to whoever who directs this to make it look like these people are a little more sinister, as I said in the next sentence, than they are. And obviously at this point, the audience doesn't know if they're good guys, bad guys, what they're up to. So I just wanted to make sure by putting that in, without giving a big description of what they were wearing and all that stuff, that's kind of the tone I am going for. And when Paul says, "Are you ready for this?" Although I'm sure no one, after leaving the theater or turning off their TV, is going to discuss the first line of dialogue. If you did, or if you thought back, what he's really talking about are two things. He is talking about what's about to happen, going in to get the little girl, and also the commitment that Holly has made for the next 14 years. So I thought of that line very early on, and I've stuck with it, and I'm going to keep sticking with it. All right. No smile from Holly means she's not in the mood. They pull ski masks over their faces. At first, I had like a cutout hood with holes for the eyes, and someone said, "You mean ski masks?" And I said, "Oh, yeah." Little girl. Okay. I changed that from 3 to 4 years old to almost 4, because when we come back all those years later, Lexi is about to turn 18. So I figured maybe that makes a little more sense. And as you saw, I just fixed stuff and made it stuff because someone had caught that. As I'll mention this now, and maybe I've mentioned it in my commentaries, but I'll go into it a little more depth because I know you're super intrigued. And I don't know at what point I started doing this. I'm sure it was after many scripts. I'd have to look back at my 15, 20, 30-year-old scripts. And it was probably the process of learning. I don't know that I've ever heard anyone specify this, but it probably came from reading a lot of other scripts that I really admired and thought were well written. So I tried to steal some of their stuff. But basically, every paragraph, more or less, I'd have to go through the whole script, could be called one shot. So you can see, for instance, a little girl sleeps with Stu Tuft, two stuffed animals. That's a shot. The door opens a crack. That's probably another shot. It could be the same shot, but and then maybe that's a close-up, and then we go to Holly entering. It could be the original angle. I mean, it's possible, certainly, that the door opens and then Holly enters. So that could all be one paragraph. So she crosses the bed, scoops up the girl. This is all one shot. There could be a close-up, obviously. I mean, I guess the point is I'm not overtly trying to direct by calling shots, which I know I used to do, and some people still do. You know, if you said wide shot, a masked Holly opens noiselessly, crosses to the bed, close up, scoops the girl up in the blankets, da-da-da-da-da. You know, that would, maybe many years ago, that would be acceptable, especially in a spec script. In a shooting script today, I don't even think in a shooting script you would necessarily, once you broke it down and really were picking your shots and storyboarding it. Certainly, you would break this down and decide how many shots you want. But something Steven Spielberg said, not to me personally, many years ago that I heard is that every time you cut, you cheat the audience. Because when you think about it, you're saying, well, something is going on and we don't want you to see it, so we're going to cut to another angle. And, that's not necessarily true, because sometimes you cut to a shot so you can see what's going on. But by and large, if it's a single shot and things are happening in real time, then the audience is seeing what's going on. So, 1917 obviously had some camera trickery in it, but the illusion was that you were watching the whole movie in one take. And so I don't know where that leaves me, except to say that in a spec script like this, I want nothing to stand in the way of the reader that is going to slow him down or her down. So that could be excessive capitalization. It could be calling shots. It could be any number of things. Too much description where it's not needed. For instance, Holly Hart, early 20s, athletic, attractive. Some people might say with flowing brown hair and beautiful brown eyes that sparkle in the moonlight. Or Paul Aldwell, her surly, burly, tough guy. I tend to leave that to a very minimum because it's really not super important, and it really pigeonholes the character. And maybe it's important that they walk with a limp or they have one eye or something like that. But for the most part, I try to keep this stuff as streamlined and just moving over quickly as possible. All right, so the front door opens. So I won't comment anymore on the reason I break things into paragraphs, but when you know that, and maybe you do this in your writing and you've seen in others' writing, every time there's a page, not a page break, but a line break, or you could call them paragraphs, I consider that a new shot. Again, not that it matters, but that's kind of my motivation for doing it. Little girl follows close behind the reach of sidewalk, an SUV parked behind the van. So they came out of the van. One of them is going to the SUV. And some people might say, well, why didn't Paul drive the SUV? Well, it was probably driven by someone else, and Paul and Holly probably had some conversation leading up to this that necessitated them being in the same vehicle. You take care of her. See, this right here, that could be an off-screen line, because if I'm staying true to myself, and if this is a shot right there, then you wouldn't necessarily see Rachel. I just realized that. Now, Rachel's first line would be off screen, but I guess it doesn't really matter because she wheels around, and then you can picture, a new shot. Now that I really closely examine this, what I said about being a single shot wouldn't necessarily hold water, because if Holly wheels around, it's probably a medium shot or close up on her. She makes a shushing sound. We would have to cut to see Rachel not appreciating it. So, yeah, don't scrap everything I just said, but I guess I'm just thinking the logic through. I mean, I could say makes a shushing sound, period, new paragraph, Rachel doesn't appreciate it. But I guess that would be kind of carrying it to the extreme. So maybe this is off screen. It does. I mean, again, it doesn't really matter because this is just the blueprint. All right, exposition, a little maybe intrigue. I don't know about intrigue, but a little, why would one member of the Supreme Court have to give permission for this to happen? Of course, this pays off later. But I wanted to set that up because I didn't want what happens eventually to come completely out of the blue. And I think originally I had that line as like not pissing off one ninth of the Supreme Court, but I think this is more exact, probably given what's happened, which we again find out later. So yeah, the whole thing I said, I mean, this is two shots, obviously. So again, maybe what I said earlier wasn't exactly accurate. Climbs into the man, shuts the door. One thing some writers do, and I'm not saying it's wrong or mine's right or vice versa, they would say, Rachel replies with an indignant look that Holly ignores. Holly climbs into the van. How I don't know if I learned it or evolved into it, but since Holly was the last person mentioned, we can easily connect Holly with she in this case. And it's just a very, very small thing, but it just helps move the script along, move the read along. Now here, of course, you have to reintroduce, and Paul urges her along the SUV. So, I mean, you could say Paul urges Rachel, but you've established who's in the shot. This, Rachel, you could say Rachel, but again, it's obvious who it is. If it's ever not obvious, then you need to put in a name. And I've read a lot of scripts where I've had to go back and say, who? What? And then go back and say, oh, okay. All right, so Justice Martinez, we now know that Justice Martinez is a Supreme Court judge or justice, whatever. So that connects that. Obviously, Rachel being sarcastic there. Going back to here, I read somewhere that you should go through your script and take out all the words as in adjectives that end in ly, and instead substitute verbs that give across that same sense. So in this case, if I said she goes with him, we don't know how she goes with him. So I have trouble with that because I don't love to use adjectives, and I'm not sure why someone said that, although I mean, certainly in novels and such, they definitely play a much bigger role. And I'm not sure why a person said that, but I've heard it and read it more than once. And I do know that some people use excessive amounts of adjectives. I should try to keep track and see how many I use. But I'm going to leave it in. Maybe it's the lazy way to describe it. Paul opens the SUV's rear door. Opens. I mean, you don't really even need SUV here, because what other door is it going to be? Or what other vehicle? Puts her inside. That's fine. Sits the little girl down on one seat. On one bench seat, sits opposite. Watches the little bundle stir. Okay, so the little girl's more or less kind of asleep, but awakening. Looks around his turn and her eyes come to rest on Holly as she pulls off her hood. Wonder if I should put a period there. Her eyes come to rest on Holly. Oh, maybe I should do this. Yeah, I could maybe do that. Misspell a word. Maybe that's a little better. Who pulls off her hood? Ooh, I like that better. Okay. Now we know she has dark hair, which I wrote because the actress that I hope plays this role has dark hair. Who are you? All right. So obviously, I mean, not that we have to, but the little girl's mommy has just left. She doesn't know. And so you think a 4-year-old girl, what is her first inclination going to be? And that's what I arrived at. The other thing that she says by not saying it is, where's daddy? And we didn't see the dad in the house, so we may assume, he's dead, he's working, they're divorced, he's not there, whatever. But by the girl not saying, where's mommy, where's daddy? Sometimes you can say stuff by not saying it. That's my point. All right. So exposition, but super important. She's going to shake hands with the little girl, which, she hugged her only to keep her sort of protected and quiet while they were leaving. And once they get in the van, she doesn't continue holding her. She puts her over on that seat. So I hadn't thought a lot about that until just now, but I think that kind of speaks to her businesslike approach, which is appropriate given that she is the U.S. Marshal and not really her aunt. But don't tell anyone. All right. Screws up. She looks from the big hand to the kind face. That's not my name. It is now. Dun, dun, dun. So this tells you, hopefully, the audience / reader quite a bit. I thought of that line early on, too, I must admit. I wasn't exactly sure how to do this, but I think, instead of giving her a name and then renaming her, I thought that worked well. And I don't know, henceforth might be a little big of a word, but gives us some serious thought. Looks to the hand in front of her. Looks at. I'm going to change that. It's funny how you can get caught up in tiny words that, again, don't mean anything in the long run, because once you get, on the set, nobody cares how you wrote it. Starts to put up a hand to shake, hesitates. It'll be okay. Considers his great honor. Moment reaches out, shakes Holly's hand. Right here, I could say shakes her hand, but I've got she and her, so. And then this, very random, but I was thinking, well, what would a 4-year-old do? She wouldn't say, nice to meet you, Miss Holly, or something. I don't think. So I think because she says this, it kind of confirms that she indeed is not afraid of Holly. In fact, she's growing fonder of her. Comfortable as she can. As she drifts back off to sleep. As she drifts back off, that makes sense. All right, her smile fades, which is kind of not ominous, but it shows us that she was literally putting on a happy face to some extent. Fade to, you could say dissolve to. Obviously, the difference technically is that fade to implies fading out and fading in, as opposed to a dissolve, which you know what a dissolve is. And I don't, you don't know, but fade to when we're having a lapse of time is fine with me. Dissolve is fine with me. What I don't like to see, and I don't know that there's any reason for them, and I'm sure I used them at some point, is when you have cut to, smash cut to, or just anything. When you think cut to, it's just totally needless because, A, it's not the screenwriter's decision to make, and B, it doesn't mean anything because it goes without saying that scenes cut between each other. So whenever I see those, for the most part, I just advise the writer not to use them. And so you could say that you don't need the fade to. However, given that we're going 14 years into the future, I think it is worthwhile. See what I mean about this taking a long time? I've talked for all this time and I'm just on page 3. If nothing else, my voice will need a rest after a while. All right, so as funny as it sounds, I didn't struggle, but I thought about this because mid-30s means 34, 35, 36. Late 30s means 39, 40. Well, it could mean 40, and so later 30s, maybe people would say, why did you even do that? But I'm thinking, again, because of how old this actress is, and if and when she reads this, I want her to say, perfect. And by then she may be, depending on when she reads this, she may be 39 or 40 or whatever. I'm not sure exactly how old she is. So anyways, I'm picturing her as like 36, 37 years old. All right, more fit. So she's worked out. We know that. She's kept herself in shape, which is awesome. Lays into a body bag, equally strong blows. So she's, doesn't just have favoring one or the other. She speaks in cadence. 3 more days. All right, so Paul comes back. I'm I'm picturing, and again, this isn't my call, but I think she could play herself in the first scene, in the opening. We could get a younger actress that looks like her, but I think, there's ways for, especially since she has a ski mask on for a little bit and then she takes it off. But I think we as him, I'm talking like I'm either directing it or part of the crew, but forgive me. All right. So Paul obviously is now in his probably early 50s or something. Maybe a little older than that. All right. This right here is intended to get across the fact that Holly's father is dead. And it doesn't say that. And I don't know that it doesn't super matter. I mean, obviously, there's no more mention of her mom or dad in the rest of the movie. But what Paul is saying is your father would be proud of you. But what Holly is saying is, well, if he knew I spent my first 14 years as a U.S. Marshal basically babysitting this kid, he would literally have another heart attack. And so whether he's, because I did originally in an earlier version, or maybe even in the outline, they had more conversations about, he would be so proud of you. You're carrying on his tradition. He was probably in the military or something, and he and Paul worked together. But I thought that tells us enough about what he's doing now. He's, maybe he's dead or maybe whatever. Maybe it doesn't tell us anything. Maybe I'm overthinking of it. Finishes on the bottom with a kick from each leg. Grabs a towel. All right, so she's got her water bottle and headed to Miami. All right, so she said 3 more days. I would guess you could imply, well, maybe not because you don't know what she's doing at this point. But obviously up here she's saying something is about at the end and I'm enduring it and I'm almost done with it. And now when she says, am I headed to Miami? We don't know where they are right now, of course. They could be in Fort Lauderdale, but the implication is that she has been waiting to hear what's going on and she's about to find out. So again, this is probably the first instance out of many, many, many in the script where I ask a question and I don't ask it. Well, I do because I wrote it, but a character asks a question and does not get a direct answer. He could have said, no, you're not. It came down between you and Briggs and she got the job or he got the job. It doesn't really matter. But you don't really need that no because his answer, what he says, answers the question and it just always feels like it moves things along a little faster and can reveal character and can do all that kind of stuff. All right. So, honestly, probably when Paul says it came down to you and Briggs, because he's already hesitated a beat too long, he may not even have to say anything. And so he doesn't say it came down to you and Briggs got the job because he doesn't need to say that. But what he does say is, I'm sorry, because obviously he wanted her to get the job and she's really wanted it, which we find out because she heaves a water bottle across the room. Against the wall, it smashes into the wall. I guess against is right. Water bicycle everywhere, just like that. She's back to normal. So, kind of quick-tempered, but gets over it. I'm stuck with her indefinitely. We don't know who the her is, but I think most people are going to guess the Lexi character. So this little bit shows kind of, it's not funny, but Holly is basically saying in that line that, are you kidding me? Well, what is she saying? Because when I wrote it, I knew, and I still do. I just got to think about it. I have to think how to phrase it. We still have a few irons in the fire. So she's basically, you can figure it out. Why do I have to? I mean, if I have to explain myself, I'm in deep trouble. But the point is that this literally is correct, right? Because of the Judge Martinez thing that Holly doesn't know about, that Paul has probably been working on for who knows how long, although that isn't explicitly said. But Holly is already sort of given up and is kind of, woe is me. I'm going to be stuck doing what I'm doing forever, which she has just said right here. You tell her yet. All right. So mystery. She doesn't answer. Whoops. Look at that. Another mistake. That's crazy, isn't it? Remains silent. Says nothing. When you think of it, if you write the word nothing, like if nothing happened, then how can you describe nothing happening? So I guess that's why I put remain silent. Should be a fun night. Again, sarcasm, not really cliffhanger, but leading on to, we're going to see what this night's going to bring. He sighs. He feels bad for her. All right, here's Lexi, new actress, obviously, from the first Lexi. There's the new names, Jake and Luke. What do you think? Leave a comment. It would be interesting. It would be interesting to do this live on YouTube and have people actually watching, because I did this with other people's scripts, and occasionally they would comment. I have to think about that. 20-year-old twins. 2-on-2 volleyball. Lexington and both teams play to win. So that, it introduces the four people. There could be a couple shots there, and they're playing hard. They're not just horsing around. And so let the dialogue begin, or I should say continue, because again, what's the rule? Always enter a scene as late as possible and leave it as quick as possible, which reminds me, not that I learned that from Save the Cat Strikes Back, but if you hear this, the fanning of pages, I finally, in fact, I've commented how I keep, it's so embarrassing. I keep meaning to find that book so I can refer to that Dark Night of the Soul or Night of the Dark Soul. And as it turns out, it was sitting right underneath my trackball, literally staring me in the face. But it is Dark Night of the Soul, which comes after All Is Lost, as you know. All right, just want to confirm that. Dark Night of the Soul, which makes more sense. All right. Whoops. Get my trackball back. So, all right, Jake, who is Lexi's boyfriend. It's only for the weekend. So something's going on here. She hasn't told Connie something, and we know that Holly has to tell her something. And so that's already setting up a possible little tension. It's a no on the elopement. And so what this very sort of obtusely, I guess in a very, very vague way, says that Jake and Lexi are pretty serious, because is it in the realm of possibility that they could elope? And so that's why Abby says that. And, she's 98% not serious, but the other 2% I think is left for debate. But then Lexi immediately says it was never a yes. And I put not amused in there because I wanted to make sure that was the delivery, not a joking, it was never a yes or something like that. She's serious, and she's a little offended by what Abby said. Now, speaking of parenthetical directions, in the old days, I used to give a lot of them, and I realized at some point, maybe from people's critiques, that I really, really, really had too many, and I was really overdoing it. So at some point, I don't know if I just cut them cold turkey or try to cut them back. So other than when you have to have them, like when it's not clear who's talking to who, right here, Jake, it could say to Lexi under here, but I don't really think it's needed. But in this case, I wanted to make sure that we knew that the audience knew that Luke was talking to Jake and not to someone else, because what Luke is saying there, better luck next time, is that, oh, maybe, you will eventually elope or get married or something like that. All right, he fake throws it. Now, see, this is an instance where the last word I said was Luke, or the last name, so he flinches, and that makes it obvious. I don't think you would have to ever put the person's name twice in a row, like Luke, and then Luke flinches. Very little things. Again, it doesn't improve your script, but it makes it easier to read. And again, anything you can do to keep it chopping along is good. All right, so not funny. Luke's obviously referring to this, and then Jake is referring to this, so that's two answers in one. He gets into position as a cell phone rings. Some people, this is an ongoing debate, not a big hot debate, but I talked about not putting anything in that slows down the read, and a capital in all caps does slow down the read. When you're introducing a new character, that's important because you want people to register it and say, okay, a new character I just met. But if it's a sound effect, it's simply held over from the days and still is a viable thing, where someone has to know, the prop person has to know that we need a cell phone, and then sound effects has got to know that we need it to ring. And so I don't know, in a spec script like this, that you could argue that that's not even needed, because in a shooting script, it certainly would be, especially if it was really going to ring. But even then, but it's just, it's sort of the way you're supposed to do it. And I don't know that, I guess I'd have to think if I've read scripts with no caps for sound effects or certain things. The other thing is that some people, a lot of people, I think, would capitalize cell phone rings because cell phone is a prop, but then you've got the pile of clothes and bags, and those are props. And again, for a spec script, a lot of people, I've read a lot of scripts where they just over capitalize, and it just bugs me like crazy. A lot of people would say a pile of clothes, which is what caps implies, and bags. And this is now even making me think of not even capitalizing any sound effects even, because it's not, it's important that it rings, but a cell phone rings. That's kind of how I read it. So I have to give that some thought. But, and I think I've said it before, but I'll say it one last time. I don't think you can go wrong with minimal amount of caps, because I do know that the more caps, the slower the read. All right, double or nothing, it's a dinner bell. So that's kind of saying a couple things. Phone always goes and crosses. And since Lexi is crossing, we know that's her ringtone. Checks a caller, answers, I'm just leaving. All right, so if there was any question, well, another tricky thing, and I don't know if I've talked about this, is introducing people's names in natural ways. Because at this point, we don't know any of these people's names for sure. We might be able to think or deduce that this is Lexi. But, the simple, the sloppy, the lazy way is to say, hey, Lexi, don't you think she'll be a little surprised? But in real life, if they're doing what they're doing, you almost never say someone's name in a conversation when you're meeting them for the first time, or even then. Well, for the first time you would, but if you're just saying hello to a friend, you wouldn't say, oh, hey, Bob, how you doing? You just say, hey, how's it going? So at this point, we don't know for sure any of their names. I just realized that. But now we know that A, she's talking to Holly, and B, we know that that's Lexi because she calls her Aunt Holly. It also tells us that as far as she knows, she is her aunt. Luke is congratulating himself on this. He gets upper step phone still there. Air still. Why can't you tell me now? Now this, see here, these are very, very small things, but to me they're important. She answers the phone so we know she's talking into the phone. Right here, the phone is still to her ear, but she suddenly stops gathering frowns. She might look at her friends and say, hey, you guys. But she says, why can't you tell me now? And I just wanted to make clear that people knew she was giving that line into the phone. There's exchange looks. This thing about exchanging looks, you can be puzzled looks, bewildered looks, curious looks, confounded looks, excited looks. But generally, given the circumstance, the actors, the directors are going to know what sort of looks to exchange or to give each other. So this goes back to the idea that here's a shot. This is probably a close-up. And then we cut to a reaction shot of those three. And then we cut back to that shot of Lexi. All right. Seeing a few. Disconnects us from what? She shrugs, meaning she shrugs it off. Again, there's a question that's not answered. Puzzle bordering on concern. Just in case it's bad news. All right, so there's how we slip in his name, and I think that was a relatively not recent, but kind of recent change that at one point I went through and I said, oh my gosh, I don't even know who these people are, which you don't necessarily have to know the very first scene, very first time you meet them. I don't even know if we know Rachel's name now that I think about it. Anyways, very noble, Sir Jake. But I think that makes a lot of sense because he's doing what he considers something noble above and beyond the call, and she confirms that. She heads for the parking lot, where 3 cars wait. She heads for the parking lot where 3. I don't know if you need a comma there or not. She heads for the parking lot. The 3 cars was to give away that Jake and Luke rode together, but I don't know that that's really important. I have to think about that. When she's out there, Lexi is the only female. Right. So this begins the long running thing, which I've mentioned many times about Jake, who used to be Gary, who used to be Troy for a short time, or Tony. But Jake and Holly, and I'm probably beating this to death. It's not a relationship. It's not really a crush. It's not a cougar thing. It's just something, and that's all I want it to be. This time, obviously, to me, this shows that Jake is kind of a hothead, and Luke is more of the goofy, lighthearted twin. He shakes it off as Jake stops. And that's what we call a tell. So, I mean, we know that they're twins, so brotherly love doesn't tell the audience anything they don't already know, but it kind of speaks to their relationship somewhat. And Luke's line is saying that he is convinced that not that there's something going on between Jake and Holly, but that he does, I guess, like her, or have not infatuated, but maybe has a thing for something. All right. Emotion. Here's another thing. After dialogue, we know that this is Abby because there's no other females in the scene. So some people will write Abby motions for Luke to come along, which is fine, but I always prefer he and she or him or her where necessary. Again, it's just a little bit cleaner. All right. Very impressed. I don't think too close. So this, I mean, very, a very small thing. We don't know at this point, even though the description told us that Lexi is 1 day shy of 18, we don't know how old she is. And, these days, teenagers, especially in movies, they could look 16 or they could look 24, and they're supposed to be some other age. But what the 2 glasses of milk, the reason I wrote that is to say, A, she's probably not 18, although the drinking age, they raised it to 21, didn't they? Like 20 years ago. A little behind the times, Jack. But so 2 glasses of milk is saying Holly drinks milk and Lexi is, and nothing's changing just because she's almost 18. And to me, that says responsible. And it's just crazy how many teen movies just feature kids drinking and no repercussions, no big deal, just like having sex. It's just absurd. What's the occasion? This is a time where this is sort of the other circumstance under which I use parenthetical information in dialogue. I could have a whole line, after what's the occasion, and then Holly looks around confused or something like that, or a curious or puzzled look. But it's just a quick look. It does tell us that there's got to be a cut there, right? Because unless it's a 2-shot, because there has to be the reaction, and then we come back to Lexi. But the main reason I do it is to save space, because otherwise you'd have to double space. You'd have to have her reaction and then double space again to dialogue. So it's a little bit of cheating, but hopefully not too much. There are some people who will literally write stage or action directions in that, which maybe I'll point out later. But again, it's not like you're going to get crucified for it, but I don't think it's the right way to do it. Okay, so this tells us a few things, and I'm not going to sit here and describe it because hopefully you can figure it out. But I will say, here's another question that doesn't get answered. Suspicious at the beginning, patience lasts only 2 bites. Okay. This was, I don't know at what point I'd have to look back and see when I put in that, are you dying, am I dying? But, I mean, there's a million things, she could say something generic like, what's going on? Or why do you want to talk to me? Or something like that. But I kind of like this because sometimes that could be a fear that a kid has or anyone has, that the reason you're doing something super nice for me is that one of us is dying or moving or something like that. Plus it feeds into later on where when we not are physically introduced, but when Holly brings up Rachel and then Lexi goes, oh, is she dying? So it kind of works at a couple of levels. All right. So again, she asks a question. She doesn't answer directly. All right. So I'm not going to say this is the best dialogue ever, even though it may be. But again, I don't know how long I've been doing this subconsciously or otherwise, but it's amazing how many questions are in the dialogue that don't get answered. They do get answered, but not directly. So instead of saying, oh gosh, my memories of her faded ever since that fateful night that you took me out of my bed and brought me here and have raised me to be such a good and decent teenager, and I really appreciate it. So instead, her answer, or what she says, kind of says, oh my gosh, why did you bring that up? I've either, pushed her memories out of my mind, or I've told you I don't want to talk about this. And I think based on Holly's question, she has probably never told Lexi much. She may have said what happened to her, that she's dead, she's gone away. We don't really know, because she doesn't know that Lexi doesn't know her mom was in prison at this point. And so Holly, again, would she really say that? We don't know what's happened these 14 years. And I think one question that I'll get some feedback on from people who read this is, do we care what happened during those 14 years specifically? And how much of their relationship can we glean or come to understand based on this one scene together and probably the next couple scenes? All right, got no appetite. She feels a little bad for her because she does. I mean, Holly does. And then a little, a lot. I don't know. Would Holly ask her that? Feels a little bad for her. Lexi's mood dark. She says, "We can't bring herself to pick it up." She would probably stab it with her fork, not her knife, but that doesn't matter. You remember a little, a lot. I think Holly would know that Lexi doesn't know that she's going to jail, but maybe she's. I say maybe she's doing this, and yet I wrote this, so it's kind of funny. You remember a little, a lot. I guess she's trying to mine Lexi's memory to see if when she was 2 or 3, she does remember anything, and not that, 14 years later, she's suddenly asking her this. So it's uncomfortable, I think, on a couple of levels for a couple of reasons. And it's putting Lexi kind of ill at ease, to the point where she says, "Is she dying? She's dead already. Oh my God, that's it, isn't it?" So I can't really explain it, but I think this is good. Obviously I would, or I'd change the dialogue. But I think it serves a purpose, and hopefully you can see why. All right, here we go. A little exposition here. So, I mean, this technically could come right here. We wouldn't technically need this. Are you dying? Before you were born, your mom had gotten... I may have even considered that, but I thought it was just too abrupt and too much of a bombshell. And this gives us a little more backstory on the two. If I would have included like a montage as they grew up, and we see Lexi as a little girl and Holly are dropping her off for school, and them playing at the yard and eating dinner together. And certainly in a minute, maybe you could certainly do that. And maybe someone will think that's important to do. But I'm playing without a net here, and just going straight to the grown-up Lexi. So having said that, that's the reason that I put all of this stuff in. I didn't want to just jump right to here. All right, she drops her fork. Obviously, this is like shocking because Lexi, for the information, but I think when she hears Salerno, she must know what a big deal that is, even though she's only just about 18. All right. So some people say, "Oh, 2, when you were 2, well, what happened? Because you were almost 4 when the heist took place." Well, obviously, it took a while for it to go through the justice system and all of that stuff. There's a happy ending. All right, so that is a loaded sentence, isn't it? Because happiness is relative, and is it happy for Rachel? Is it happy for Holly? Is it happy for Lexi? Who is it happy for? Nick, Granddaddy Salerno's last. Now this is a very subtle thing right here. When she says Granddaddy, she is establishing that last surviving son. But when she says granddaddy, she's kind of saying that Salerno's the granddaddy of the crime family, the crime boss. But maybe she slips because Salerno is, guess whose granddaddy? But the way I think it's couched here in the sentence, that it wouldn't really stick out as like a sore thumb until the second time you watch the movie. So please do. Preferably paying for it. There's a happy ending. They reduced her sentence. Okay. Cliffhanger. She was paroled 5 days ago. So there's no question here, right? It's not like, guess when she was paroled or guess how much they reduced her sentence. She's just, whoops, I just noticed I got an extra space in there. They reduced her sentence. Links for waiting for the other shootout. She's in a wave of emotions. So this is a situation where, you could say Lexi just sits there. You could say Lexi sits there contemplating. She's considering. That's another thing. Considering, contemplating, takes a beat, takes a moment. So that's the very shorthand way, and the longhand way would be a very novel, as in writing novel, not unique, but to go into a big long explanation of Lexi's, how she's feeling, how she reacts, and all of this stuff. But hopefully in those 3 relatively quick sentences, the director and the actress would get it. And maybe they don't even need that. But we need to visually see how visceral her reaction is so Holly can deliver her next line. All right. Yeah, this is, again, it's kind of a direct answer. But it certainly gets the point across. Holly feels kind of bad again here. Takes a drink of milk. Any other bombs to drop? So we know at the volleyball court, we didn't hear Holly, but we know that she said, hey, I've got something to tell you tonight. And so having just heard this giant bombshell, she just, to me, kind of jokingly says, any other bombs to drop, just as a way to get the conversation going, and not expecting there to be any, but Holly obviously has a couple other things. And so I figured there's sometimes, maybe this is just lazy, but there's sometimes when you just got to drop a bomb and you don't want to beat around the bush. And that's kind of how I felt here. I'm not your aunt, instead of, well, I picked you up and way back then I said we were at, but you know what? Guess what? Even though you've never asked over the years, I'm not really your aunt. So that would just kind of be weak and unimpactful in my view. So this is how I'm doing it. Oh my gosh, I'm going to stop this at an hour, and I've been recording 57 minutes. That's crazy. All right. So here's what I'm not. Here's what I am. All right. So these 2 lines and Lexi's expression reaction, and I just love this little line comparison. So I used it. Again, does it have to be in there? No. All right. So in this time, she has figured a lot of things out, and she's in the process of figuring more out, right? Because she knows that she's a U.S. Marshal. She knows she's not her aunt. She knows her mom was involved with the mob. So, without her literally putting it together and spending 45 seconds of dialogue adding things up, I just thought it would just sort of come in. Jesus, this whole time you could almost do that. And then it boom, it hits her like a ton of bricks. And I think you could even not, yeah, you could leave out all of this stuff, but this is kind of to help the audience along a little bit and to get to the place where she can deliver this line. All right. And I think I mentioned, I just put this in because it's interesting that that's the real name. And I don't know that I've ever heard that used because witness protection is used, but WITSEC, obviously quicker to say, and then later on, if needed, we could use that. So, and again, Holly immediately goes to this safe space of just delivering some facts instead of saying, oh, well, it'll be okay. I should have told you earlier or something. She goes to this, which kind of speaks to the fact that she is not really necessarily emotionally ready to deal with the repercussions of everything that has built up over the past 14 years. And it hasn't really built up because Lexi didn't know. So it's just like literally hitting her, not literally like a ton of bricks, but which is why of all the things Holly could have said, Lexi is like, why, who cares? All right, they're all falling apart. Two more things. Yikes, two more things. After we know the language, you're gonna. Okay, so this tells us that Holly has somehow figured it out, learned it, hacked into her computer, who knows what. And then she gives the explanation, which I don't know. The twins are 20, Abby's 19, Holly's about 18. Not that they would need their permission, and which is why I didn't say permission, but gone along with, as in, at some point, Holly probably spoke to the parents and say, hey, here's what's going on, but if you're worried at all, don't worry, I'm going to be up there with them. And I thought that was a quick way to just sort of get that sweep it out of the way, assuage. I was just trying to think of that word. Just try to get it out of the way so we don't have to really think about the parents for the rest of the movie. All right, so this, you could argue of the three things she's told her, or four, that's, well, it really, that is set up by everything that's happened before. She got paroled. I'm not your aunt. You're in the witness protection program. I know about your plans for the weekend. Oh, and by the way, your mom will be up there at the resort. She wants to see you. So again, this could have been dragged out in a much longer bit of dialogue. But as I said, sometimes you can get away with just boom. It's not really it's sort of on the nose, but you can get away with it if it's super impactful and it's just going to let you get on to other things instead of build up. As a midnight, you're an adult, which means it is okay. So we're, reaching page 10 to 12, the inciting incident, the catalyst sort of thing. So, Holly has given Lexi her sort of inciting incident, if you will. Just literally a page and a half of bombshell after bombshell. And I'm just going to, you want me to stop? I know it's a lot. So again, no answer there directly. Her phone rings. That could also be written like that. Her phone rings. She pulls it out, checks it. Yeah. This Paul takes a moment to connect. You're on like the Last Supper. So this is kind of, it's, again, like all good dialogue, in my opinion, it says a couple things. She's sort of making a joke, but she's literally saying the Last Supper, which is sort of a giveaway, a tell, as I said earlier. This one from Holly to Lexi when she thinks back on it and says, Last Supper, why did she say that? Because obviously Holly hasn't told her that she's leaving. All right, are you sitting down? Okay, and he could literally be meaning that. Holds for a beat for drama. On the other line, well, he's going to produce you asked, she asked for you. This intercut is obviously if you're going to have both sides of the conversation and you're not just going to hear everything out of the earpiece of the phone or the microphone, whatever, then you have to intercut. And when you intercut, you always need to end intercutting, which I did here. And you wouldn't necessarily have to say on Holly. You could just say Holly puts down her phone. But this makes it, 100% obvious what's going on. And since, I've established Paul's office and I've established the dining room, so I don't have to say interior dining room. Certainly you could, but then every time you cut back and forth, you'd have to put in that slug line. And so intercut is it's not cheating, but it's just the simple way of doing it to keep things as clear as possible. Yes, sir. So she does answer the question there. Oh my gosh, I'm over an hour already. So 10 pages in 1 hour. That is, I don't know if this is helpful or not, but I guess it's helpful for me because I did change a couple of tiny things. So that's it I'll have to figure out what day this really is. It'll be on the name or something, but I haven't gotten any comments I've been uploading for 27 days, and I don't think I've read any comments. As I mentioned before, getting 4, 5, 6, 10 views on any given one, which is kind of cool, especially if if one of those is the same person who's watching every day. If so, he or she has not commented or has not let me know. But I think, as I mentioned, this is probably most useful for very young novice writers, college age people. I think would really learn a lot from this. Maybe not, but maybe so. But I'm going to pull a plug for now, mostly because I'm tired of talking for an hour straight. But I'm going to, am I going to do this for the whole script, knowing that after I have people read it, it might change? I don't know. If I don't, at least you have 1 hour of Jack's inner thoughts leading you through the first 10 pages of the script. And it really does show you, again, maybe sounding self-serving, how much thought I try to put into literally every line of dialogue and every line I write. And any good writer does that. Certainly, I'm not in a club or a league of my own. But when you think about it, if, in this case, this could be easily made for $2 or $3 million or less. So I'm not writing a $200 million spec script because that's totally absurd. But it does go to show you, in my opinion, or my take on it, is that I respect a director's and the actor's time who hopefully are eventually going to read this, or even a reader. And I just want to make it as good, as painless, as page-turning as possible. And every little thing you can do to make it that way is just a little feather in your cap. Because again, especially readers who are paid, but they're not specifically paid to read your script, unlike if you pay for a script coverage or something. The more you can do to make their job easier and get the writing out of the way, so to speak, so they can enjoy the story and engage with it, the more you can do that, the better. At least that's my school of thought. So, oh my gosh, long time. Thanks for sticking with me. If you did, if I don't do this anymore, then hopefully this showed you something. If I do some more, then all of this last conversation will be a moot point. Moot. Anyways, thank you, and we'll see you next time on A Screenwriter's Journey.